very much for tuning in wherever you are, YouTube and all the other places that we broadcast from. It makes it sound a bit professional there. Thanks for listening to the last couple of episodes where I was on my own because busy Christmas. People are too busy to come onto a podcast, to be fair. So I did a couple of solo, and thank you for your patience on that and your support. You can support us on Buy Me a Coffee. Buy Me a Coffee, and the link is in the description wherever you are. But more importantly, let's get into this week's episode. My guest today is a psychotherapist and an author, and her name is Stella O'Malley. How are you doing, Stella?
Hello there. How's it going?
Very well. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
Delighted to be here.
Thank
I'll
you.
talk about mental health all day, every day.
Well, they're the kind of guests we want, because it makes it very much easier for me, Stella. We always start in the same place. Could you give us a short history of your upbringing, please?
Okay. I grew up in Blanchardstown in Dublin 15, and very boring suburban life that it was. And I left home. I had quite a difficult childhood. I was an unhappy kid, very unhappy kid for various reasons. And I left home at 17 and, moved into, as such, Dublin City, which was where my star was at all times in my teenage years. Couldn't get there fast enough. And lived there for quite some years, and then ultimately moved down the country. Moved down the country, then married and had kids. And I'm happy living in Offaly now, but I wonder, will I always stay here? I'm not sure, but I like it for now.
Yeah, well, you're just right next to me. I'm in Westmeath, so it's
not
so it's not too far away. And
are you from Dublin too?
No, I'm actually from Athlone, but I went to a school up in Swords in Dublin, so. There might be a slight bit of a twang still left in me. Yeah, people do tend to point that out, but yeah, and it's again, I'm quite happy where I am now. It's down the country and it's a little bit quieter. But when I do get up to Dublin City, I still very much enjoy it.
I do feel like I've gone home when I go to Dublin. I like the wit. I like the irreverence. I like the quick answers. I like it. I think you can have more fun with strangers in Dublin.
Yeah, I talked about this before about the anonymity of the city as well. It's something that's quite I have an anxiety disorder, and when I find myself, I used to think it was really daunting going to somewhere like Dublin City because it's so big and compared to where I'm from, obviously, and there's so many people. But then I kind of started to see the other side of it where I am anonymous, and sometimes I'm nervous about meeting people, and all I'm like, oh, it's not the day to kind of talk to people. But when you're in Dublin, you just kind of walk around and go about your own business. That's quite comforting for me.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's also the comfort of saying hello to people. I live in Birr, small enough town, but an awful lot of faces, and there's a comfort, I think, in just nodding to people. Sometimes just going out and go to the shop and you just see quite a few people that you need. When you live a very online life, which I do, it's nice to just, as such, touch grass. You know what I mean? You go outside, you get to shops and you meet a few people, and it's grounding in a way.
That's interesting. When I'm out here, so I'm like maybe 7 or 8 kilometers from Athlone town, and everybody always nods and waves, and I love that. But the closer you kind of get to Athlone town, it's not really there anymore. But when I was growing up, everybody used to say hello and nod, and it's a shame because it's a really nice, like you said, the kind of grounding thing, but kind of a comforting.
Sorry, it's all cold up right here.
That's all right. I'll talk away then. But it's nice to have that. I don't know. It is nice to have that little bit, but the best of both worlds I'm kind of getting at the moment, so that's kind of enjoyable. So you say you were an unhappy kid. Like, when did you first become aware of mental health? Was there just like a sadness to you as a child, or was it something deeper than that?
Yeah, I suppose there was problems in the family, and there was alcoholism, and I think I was at a very young age, about 4 or 5, I realized, all right, so we've a different family, we've things going on that others don't have. And that was very interesting for me, and to realize, and it's all secret. It's not spoken about, and it's not you do not speak about it. I was that was made very clear to me, even though it was blindingly obvious to everybody.
Yeah.
So it was ridiculous, very, very kind of secret, non-secret. Like you're not talking about it, but everybody knows about it, and it's completely accepted by everybody. And there was, yeah, so it was not only alcoholism, there was an awful lot of dysfunction and pretty extreme mental health issues in the family. So I was aware of it from a very young age, but I wasn't aware of how to navigate it. Do you know what I mean? I just realized, okay, so some people live very crazy lives, and then the rest of us don't, and we live alongside each other, and we're all supposed to get along. And this is mental. How do I fit in all this? So how I fit it, I think I became very angry. I didn't like it. I was unhappy. I felt, the people with the mental health issues were ruling the roost, and the people who didn't have them were pandering or something, very much at the beholden to anybody else who hadn't got the issue. So basically, the squeaky pig gets the meal, if you follow me. The person who's loud is going to get everything, and other people are being forced to endure an awful lot of unhappiness as a result. And so that was shockingly unfair to me and didn't seem right on any level. And I suppose it's no accident that in my 30s I decided to train as a psychotherapist.
Right. So it wasn't until you got to your 30s when you decided to become a psychotherapist. Like when did that like switch go off in your mind then? Or why did it go off in your mind at that age?
I don't know. I was well, I do know. I know exactly, actually. So I had a very colourful, misspent youth. So I was nowhere near training to be a psychotherapist. And I was very wild and had a good few years of wildness. And, it was dysfunctional and crazy, but fun in its own tense, anxious way. It was an awful lot of fun. And I had a shop in Dublin, in Temple Bar. And that was fun, great crack. And it was a little bit vacuous, a little bit boring, even though it was quite fun at the start. As the years went by, it's like, oh my God, 25 grey t-shirts, 36 black ones. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It felt like I wouldn't mind some bit more brain going on in life. And I was tapping my fingers, looking around in Dublin, going, I don't know if I want to live here. It was very dysfunctional. Pretty much all of my friends were addicts. And so there was an awful lot of really crazy things happening. And I just thought, I want to move out. I want to move out to the country. I want to get a life for myself as such. And when I moved out to the country, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I was looking into getting another shop, quite seriously, clothes shop. And I started being a DJ. I can see why, because I was basically, I'd sold my shop and I was like, right, you're 26, 27. What are you going to do with your life? And I was like, what will I do? And I applied to be a DJ in these kind of local radio stations. And I got, because I speak Irish, I got a job. And then I realized I was diabolical at that. And again, there wasn't very much brain. I was crap at the tech. I couldn't do it. I can talk, but I couldn't do anything else. And so that was a disaster. And I was figuring out that was a disaster. I took a while for me to realize you're not suited to this. And somewhere in the midst of that, I went to an open evening for a course for counseling and psychotherapy. And it was like falling in love. It was bang. I went to that night and went, I have to do this. I have to do this. This is for me. So it's kind of interesting that I went to the course. I remember when I was about 16 saying to my brother that I'd like to be a psychologist. And he went, like, I don't think you'd be sympathetic enough. And I was like, and that kind of derailed me now I think about it, because that, I didn't go near it for another 15 years, I'd say. But then when I saw that open evening, bang, I was in. Yeah, loved it.
That's a brilliant thing that kind of, not, I suppose maybe that fell into your lap, but it came along and it was perfect opportunity.
I went to the open evening, so I was interested enough to go from Burr to Tullamore to an open evening. So clearly I was looking for things at the time,
And I this is something we've spoken on the podcast before. when you start as a psychotherapist, you've done your training, and you start your first few sessions. Is there an element of like imposter syndrome to
Massive, yeah.
really?
And it was very interesting. I had a brilliant lecturer who is now my friend, Fiona Hoban. She's absolutely brilliant. And I remember her explaining to us novice counselors that we shouldn't tell the client that this is our first client, because then you're imposing your nerves on them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's either a therapeutic process or it isn't. So if it is a therapeutic process, you're offering that to them. So you don't imbue them with nerves by telling them, listen, you're my first. But honestly, looking back at the start when I was first, my enthusiasm might have carried the day, but I was really into strategies. And now I'm not at all.
Okay.
I just, Jesus Christ. And if somebody started throwing strategies at me, I just think, are you a bit new at this?
Yeah, because I've been to a number of therapists, and it's interesting to note the different approaches with therapists, because everybody has their own approach with things.
And can I just say, I
Yeah.
forgot to add quite an important part of all of that, was in my 20s, I started going to therapists, trying to figure
Okay.
out who I was. And I was very distressed. There was a lot of fun, but there was an awful lot of distress, a huge amount in my 20s. And really from the moment I left home, I was looking for help, really. And I went to a range of different therapists, and they were all diabolical.
Oh,
And I used to think, I could do better than this.
yeah.
And I never meant that in an arrogant way, as in, this is so bad, I could do better than
Yeah.
this, was how I used to think. And I had a series of unfortunate incidents with therapists, which I can tell you about if you want later. And each time I thought, I can't believe they're doing this. Did they not get training? Did they not realize this is a crazy thing to do? And then, so when I went to that open night, it would be somebody who had been to quite a few therapists and had never got anywhere. And it wasn't from lack of interest. And I'd read quite a few self-help books, which had changed my life. And I had gone to a self-development program, which was a game changer for me, which was completely, you take on your own life. You do it. And that was like a psychology course. It was like counseling for beginners, if you follow me. And that course that I went to was the biggie. And I don't remember the name of the man and the woman who gave it. And it was phenomenal. It changed my life. And it wasn't counseling. So I went to counseling. So it's interesting anyway that I kind of very much on the one, I couldn't be much worse than what's out there, was my vibe.
But it's the other thing, Stella, where I would like to be. My last therapist who I went to see was someone who'd been through it, and seen it all, and felt the what depression is, and anxiety is, and it's somehow like the connection became easier between myself and himself because of that. That they had been there. I didn't want someone who was very clinical and like you were saying, strategy, someone who's like, this is the way it's going to go, and you don't find that
4 times and all
yeah this. That kind of thing was, look, maybe some people like that stuff. I certainly didn't like that stuff. But when you are approaching like different clients, and I'm guessing that your clients are like go from a young age to a an old age, does the approach change? Like, does the approach have to change if you're talking to a teen compared to someone who's maybe in their 40s?
Yeah, I find with teens, if I tell them a little bit about myself, they gel with me that little bit easier. And when it's somebody older, they don't have that need to hear about me. There's more of a trust naturally there that they can see what I'm about. While a teenager, I find an awful lot of teenagers who come to me, they'll have been to others and they'll have had a very clinical approach, and they are often really alienated from the entire concept of therapy very often by the time they come to me. And it takes a little bit of me being human with them. I do think that's the only difference. Not a massive difference, but it's something I'm aware of, that the kind of the jaded adolescent who's like, you're my fourth, and frankly, I hate yous all. And they really, there's a lot, I do think, sadly, there is a lot of very clinical approach to teenagers, which is exactly the opposite approach to teen. They want authenticity. The last thing they want is this white coat checkboard vibe. Like,
of course, I think I think it'll put anyone off at any group, at any age group. It's It's interesting. You've written a number of books, and there was a couple that I kind of wanted to touch on, if you don't mind. There was one in particular called Cotton Wool Kids. Can you tell me the idea behind that and why you wanted to write it?
Yeah, it's up there somewhere.
Yeah, see in the background.
Yeah. Um, I wrote Cottonmouth Kids is probably my favorite book. It's my first book, and it took me years and years to write. Apparently, that's very normal. That your first book takes you 20 years, and every other book you whack out. But Cottonmouth Kids was released in 2015, and what it was I became a mother in 2007, and then I had another kid in 2009, and I realized, oh my God, parenting has changed since I was a kid, like phenomenally. And there's an awful lot of anxiety, a hell of a lot of effort, a huge amount of very loving parents who are very engaged, who have very anxious children. And it was a phenomenon that I realized I was being demanded to be brought into. So I was being told to worry about things. Just one story comes to mind. My little baby, I'd collected my baby from the childminder. She was about 10 months old. And I was very good at being able to keep her asleep. So I was able to carry her from there into the car. And she was still asleep. I had that technique, and I had kind of settled her in. And she's fast asleep. And I closed the door. And then I realized, oh my God, I've locked her in. And the childminder kind of went mental and told me I had to ring. I had to smash the window. And she was giving me bricks and stuff. And I was like, no. She's asleep. I'm not going to go crashing windows in and all this sort of stuff. And what I did was rang the AA, and she got her neighbor over, and the neighbor and her basically ganged up on me, basically saying I was neglecting the kid for not smashing the window to save the child who was fast asleep in the car. And I was pushing back, going, no, if she wakes up, I can smile at her. It's cool. Everything's fine. I just need to open the car. Anyway, the AA prioritized, by the way, when it's a child in the car. And they came very, very fast, and they opened the car. But it was part of that frenetic, hysterical, smash the car, come on, save the child. And I was like, there's no need. It's mad. And 2007 was the year Madeleine McCann went missing in Portugal. It was massive, and it was the height of stranger danger. Do you remember? Do you know what I'm talking about? Height of stranger danger. And it's now been, I wrote to Cottonmouth Kids in 2015, which is a very pushback against stranger danger. It's vastly more likely that your own family and friends will hurt you rather than any stranger. And then in 2018, I think, or else 2019, the CDC in America debunked the phrase stranger danger because they said it causes more harm than it helps. And it does. And that was what that book was saying. It was saying all this anxiety, while it comes from a place of love, is creating incredibly anxious children. And we've really lost our way in parenting. And it's not from lack of love. It's not from lack of effort. But in a way, it's too intense for the kids.
I'm a jiu-jitsu coach, and I coach little kids, and it's just when you're telling the story about the car, and I sometimes get that feeling in there, if a child falls, now they're on soft mats, but I can't help but feel panic, because obviously you're responsible for the children when they're in the gym. They fall on soft mats. Sometimes they get hit with a very, very soft foam ball, but it does brings about that sense of panic. Now, I will say my fellow coach, who doesn't have an anxiety disorder, is a lot calmer in the situation. But it's funny to hear that. I'm just thinking, if I was in the situation with you, I would probably be on the side of smash the window, because that's the immediate instinctual reaction to it. But you're the mother who knows the child, and it's very weird. And I'm sure you've heard that kind of before, about people would think,
and I remember doing the equation at the time, thinking, but if I smash the window, I have to get the window. She'll be crying. I'll be driving along with a broken window. I'll have to go somewhere to get it fixed, which is a major deal when you live in the country. It's a crap equation. It's you know what I mean? But the hysteria is strong. And the way you say about the jiu-jitsu, I've really studied it. I studied it in massive, massive detail in Cottonmouth Kids. And basically it came in with 24-hour news in the late 80s, where they were selling news to us rather than giving us a public service of news. And when they started selling news, they really led with, if it bleeds, it leads. Horrible stories get people's eyes, will keep you interested by freaking you out. And it has created a massive secondary impact of a huge knowledge of all the things that could go wrong, which has made a huge amount of anxiety. So I wrote Cotton Wool Kids, and then I wrote Bullyproof Kids, kind of trying to empower children who are kind of, the anxious kids and who are on these edges. And then I wrote Fragile, again talking about anxiety. It's an epidemic. Like, anxiety is just phenomenally common, and it's a prison, and it's a self-made prison. And I strongly believe that we need to know how safe we are compared to other generations, how much more education, how much easier we have it, so that we can liberate ourselves from this terribly, terribly distressing prison that people are in.
Absolutely. There's never a good time to drop an advert in, Stella, but this is what yeah, you have a little drink there. I'll read out an advert real quick and we'll get back into it. Okay, nearly took everything out of it there. Fusion Training Center, Monkstand, Athlone, a place to train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, martial arts, and CrossFit. A great atmosphere with experienced coaches and a real sense of community. If you want to join the team, find us on Facebook at Fusion Training Center or drop in for a chat. Messed up. Fusion Training Center, train like a warrior. I was so close there. There's something that I kind of wanted to lead into Bullyproof Kids, because I have a friend who's a father to two young kids who aren't quite the school age. Now, I'm not a dad myself, but he talks to me about trying to instill in them, like, a sense of like what they should do if they're bullied, like, or this is his plan for them, I should say, rather than doing it now because they're still too young. But like, not, and people often think like, what I do if I'm bullied, oh, hit them a smack. He's not talking about that. He's talking about the idea, like the psychology behind it, or coming to him and telling him, or talking to someone, and it's something he's worried about, and it's not something that I've ever really thought about. What was your reason for writing that book?
Oh yeah, I wrote it because so many teenagers came to me, and it wasn't just that they were being bullied, although many of them had been bullied in primary school. It was also because they felt on the edges of the social circles. They could never really feel part of things. And there was a feeling of disempowerment among anybody who'd been bullied. They never quite knew. I noticed with the teenagers I worked with that they didn't understand the bullying dynamic. They just understood I was bullied. And they hadn't really got into a deeper understanding. And when you give somebody an understanding, they kind of go, oh, so it was about them, not me. And that really frees them up, because an awful lot of bullied people think that they have been watched, evaluated, and judged to be not good enough. And that's incredibly frightening. And it's happening, like, at a young age. 9, 10, 11 is a pretty vicious time, because often the other children haven't quite learned civilized behavior. 13, 14 is a particularly vicious time. And then by the time they're about 15 or 16, they've a section of the school or the group have learned you don't do that. They've not everybody, but a section have learned it. But it's so frightening for the kid who doesn't understand what the hell happened and why was I chosen. And if I can work with a kid and explain, this is probably why you were targeted, they feel better. They don't feel worse. They realize, oh, I get it. Yeah, okay. And I think it's really, really important. Bullyproof Kids is the book that has done the best, and I can see why, because it's helped so many people. I don't think very much in-depth knowledge on bullying had happened, really. There's a few good books, but there's not many. And it's a massively, the amount of people either had been bullied and I was working with them, or I was seeing somebody who was 40 or 50 or 60 and I'd say, when did things first go wrong? And they'd say, well, I was bullied when I was a child. It's so commonly the first kind of derailing of a person.
The thing which separates maybe us from kids now is the idea that if you're bullied at school, unfortunately I wasn't, but if you're bullied at school and you go home and shut the door, the voices aren't there. At least they might be up here, but they're not in your face. But now with all the stuff that kids have and the access to social media and stuff like that, it's become even worse, and those things. And we've heard some really horrible cases, like you talk about the way the news brings it out, but terrible cases of kids taking their own lives because of bullying, and it never ceases. I can't imagine the pain and the anxiety that kids have to go through now compared to what we did.
It's relentless. Like the social media pylons, the intricacies of it, the fake accounts, the amount of times it turns out that the anonymous troller is their best friend. There's so much weird. It brings out the dark side in us. The ability to be anonymous brings out the shadow side of a person, and it's frightening what it brings out. It really, it scares me. I think, I understand the freedom of anonymity, but I think people underestimate how much of our less civilized side it brings out in us.
Yeah, I agree, and it's so easy to be that person on the other side of a screen or a keyboard or whatever. It's just that, like it's and it's easy for us maybe to switch off like the social media or turn off, or maybe it's not quite easy. Some people can get quite addicted to it, but that's in a different way. Like, this we're talking about kind of a different thing, but like it is easier for us to kind of turn off or rationalize in our minds like why this, like you said, like why somebody might be being like that to us, but to be a child and wanting to be part of a social group, want to be part of friends on Facebook, and all this little thing can come in, and anonymous accounts, like that's so, shady is not the, I'm not going to curse, but we'll say shady is probably the worst thing, and I just don't know how in with all that, and then exams and everything else, and we have to have the right clothes. Like, that's all we were worried about in school, was like runners. I remember that. That's a big thing, if somebody had a pair of Jordan and everybody else was like, how did they get the Jordans? Like, we have to up our game, kind of a thing. That was the big worry. It wasn't about like how we looked on Facebook or something.
The amount of vanity that has happened as a result of social media, especially among teenagers, and the amount of anxiety that they have around their social media presence, and oh my God, it's relentless. And so many kids are going to sleep, with the phone under their pillow. It goes on until late in the night, and it starts first thing in the morning. And it's an experiment. Like, it's only since 2012 that we've had more smartphones than dumb phones. And it's only really since 2012-ish that like social media has started to gain serious ground. Well, what are we, 10 years into this extraordinary social experiment, and it's not going well. We all know people who are totally strung out by it. And the teenagers in particular, they're digital natives. They've grown up with it. And it's not going well for them. There's a huge amount of vanity, self-absorption, massive levels of anxiety. And they're really, really unsure of themselves. They haven't got a kind of strong sense of self, because so much of it is online, which is really kind of a nebulous kind of feeling. It's frightening, really. I really think it's very, very hard to be a teenager at the moment.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. And with all that, along comes a global pandemic that added more on top. Have you seen? Because with having this podcast and talking so much about my own mental health, people have come to me, and I remember talking to a friend who was just talking about how they were just in their bath one day and they just started bawling, crying, and they had no understanding of why it was, and they still don't really, I guess. But have you seen that fallout with your clients?
How many emails have come to me saying, I was managing it and then came COVID. Things were almost all right, and then COVID happened. When COVID happened, it just got so much worse. I think we will be decades realizing the impact of what we've just done. I think it has been horrendously bad for our mental health. We don't know how many anxiety disorders, how many suicides. We don't know how much obesity has happened. We don't know how much OCD has kind of flowered as a result of the lockdowns. So it frightens me how much it's impacted. I saw a huge amount of loneliness in COVID. Everybody thinking everybody else was getting to see people, and it was pretty devastating. And it was very much how you were. It was like musical chairs, and where were you when the music stopped? And for some people, their life was fine. It was cool. It just suited the bounce of the ball. It suited them. And they just didn't really know what everybody else was talking about. Why don't you bake bread and go for walks? It's very pleasant. But there was a whole other group who it was such bad timing for their life, and it literally ripped up their life. And it wasn't a case of how healthy were you at the beginning. It was, how was your life set up to handle out lockdown?
Yeah.
And that's what really, really impacted. And some people really needed. I saw my own two kids. My little boy is more of an introvert and my girl is an extrovert. I saw my daughter wilt with the lack of people in her life. And I saw my little boy happy, loving it.
Yeah.
Good. You know what I mean?
Strange, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
I started this podcast, I think like 6 weeks before it started, and um I got to like talk to people in the middle of it, and it was really interesting, kind of like you mentioned about social experiment, but like to see how people were dealing with it. And I often ask during the podcast like how people were looking after their mental health, because it was one thing about people were going for their walks and still doing that because they could, but the mental health was a different side of thing completely, it seemed, compared to it now. My answer was always like, well, I'm not someone who's an extrovert, and I'm someone who likes reading, and I'm someone who likes watching films on their own. So it was kind of suited perfectly. But to hear what the stories coming back, and it's interesting what you said. People think about like OCD or anxiety and stuff, but there was a big thing about, like you said, obesity and stuff, and people were so worried about their physical health as well, because people were obviously eating more, maybe not getting out to, maybe they didn't like walking, they prefer a gym. It was such a huge impact on everything.
And like kids who hadn't got weight on them and who were just, suddenly immediately no exercise and not much to do except eat and cook and watch telly.
Yeah.
And what do you know, 2 years later had quite a significant level of weight on them. And that would probably harass them for the rest of their life.
Yeah.
Like once you put on weight, you're kind of fighting weight.
Yeah.
It's not often that it goes and it stays away, especially in childhood. And so it's just a game changer for some people.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we talk about your podcast, if you don't mind? So your podcast is Gender, a Wider Lens podcast. You're the co-host. Why did you want to set this up?
Wow. Yeah, we myself and Sasha Ayad, she's a therapist in America. We set it up about December 2020. And the reason why we did it was we work in the world of gender, and we are every therapist who works in gender, not only is your waiting list closed, not only have you closed all avenues, you cannot, it's so busy, and there's no way I could see even a fraction of the people who email me. We had to get a way of getting out the information so that people could hear what we've got to say in a way that was publicly available, because so many people were just getting emails from me saying, sorry, not only am I closed, not only is my waiting list closed, I don't know anybody whose waiting list is open on this subject. So it's a massively in-demand field. There isn't enough therapists for people who work with gender distress. And as a kid myself, I had quite a significant experience of being, I wanted to be a boy from a very young age, from about 3 until certainly puberty and beyond. And it was very intense for me, and it was a very difficult experience for me. And I had lots of other difficulties. It wasn't the only difficulty, but it was certainly, I had something to refer to. And then when the kind of transgender kind of explosion happened in the last 10 years or so, I kind of followed it probably that bit more deeply than most people, because I knew that was a road that I could have gone down. And then I wrote an article. As you know, I write books, and so I often write for the papers, and I wrote an article about my experience, and I was asked to do a film about gender issues. And that was in 2018, and the film came out in 2018 for Channel 4. And from then on, I have just been inundated. Like my email inbox, it's just insane. It's literally insane. And 2 years later, we finally did the podcast for that reason, just to kind of, she works with only gender dysphoric young people. So her inbox is insane. So we met over insane inbox thinking, what are we going to do? It was a panicky feeling of all these people that were not helping. And we just have to say, sorry. It was a horrible, that year when it had really reached a climax, it was just a horrible feeling of, not only can I not help you, I don't know where you should go. Yeah. And I started a few organizations. I started a gender dysphoria support network in 2020, in March 2020, in the COVID. And then I started the podcast in December 2020, again, trying to help. And then I started another organization, which is a very big organization called Genspect, in the summer 21, a year later, like, all trying to get resources for this massively under-resourced field.
The first time I came across, I saw a documentary Louis Theroux did. Yeah, it was a few years ago now, but he went over to the States and he talked to kids who were obviously, gender dysmorphic, and there was one little girl who was biologically born a boy, and had the feelings of wanting to be a girl, and the parents are very supportive. So I thought, this is great. Like, this is a really good story he's bringing across. Now, the whole documentary wasn't like that. Obviously, he had to show both sides of it, but and I thought this was really great. But then afterwards, I remember Louis Theroux talking about it, but also, reading afterwards, the amount of like vitriol directed towards the parents, this kind of anger. And I didn't quite get it, because for me, that felt like that was the nice story. Like, that this is how this kid was, there's no way around it. But it was like, well, dismissing the kid's feelings was the first thing that people tend to do, was saying, the kid's only 8 or whatever, doesn't have a clue what they're talking about. The parents shouldn't be letting the kid do this. It was immediately like, I imagine it was more negative that Louis Theroux got from it and the parents got from it than positive. And I didn't quite understand, and I still don't quite understand, where that hate and dislike comes from.
Yeah, I think we live in quite a gender bound time. I think in the 80s and 90s, kids were able to be a little bit freer insofar as there wasn't as much pink and blue.
Mm-hmm.
And the pink and blue division started, obviously 100 years ago, it was very aggressive, and girls were told to be pretty and quiet and boys were told to be adventurous. Then there was a bit of freedom from the 60s onwards, and there was an awful lot of feminists bringing up boys to be whatever and girls to be whatever. And there wasn't so many restrictions. And then consumer interests got involved in the 90s, and they brought in a huge amount of emphasis on pink and blue, a huge amount of emphasis on boys being adventurous and heroic and, adventures, and the girls being pretty and princesses and fairies. And it was to make money. If you divide the toys into pink and blue, you're going to sell way more. Same with the clothes, same with the bikes, same with the birthday cakes, etc. Massive amount of money. And at the time, an awful lot of journalists analysed that, wondered how will this impact, and how it impacted is, I think 80%, and I'm not sure my numbers here, but around about 80% of kids, they don't care. It's cool, pink, blue, whatever. There's a few kids who love it. Just give me the fairy, give me the princess. Yeah. There's another section of kids, especially children who have maybe neurodevelopmental conditions, who don't like conforming to silly rules. Mm-hmm. So there could be a boy who might have a neurodevelopmental and just say, I like the pink thing. Why is the world telling me I should have? It's a silly rule. It's silly. So there's a section that it doesn't sit well with. And then there's gender non-conforming children like myself who actively want to be the opposite and feel completely imprisoned by this horrible self-created jail. When I say self-created, society-created jail that is completely unnecessary. And so that really hits hard on those kids. Thank God I didn't grow up in a world where I wouldn't have lasted a second. I wouldn't wear anything. Of course I wouldn't wear a skirt, but I wouldn't wear anything. No way I would have worn this loose neck.
Right, yeah.
No way, just get it away from me. It disgusts me. Do you know what I mean? That was my attitude. Looking back, I think I had a lot of internalized misogyny for whatever reason. I think that's kind of interesting. I'm not sure. But I certainly hated all things girly. Now, had I been brought up in later years and I'd been asked to kind of live in that pink world, I think I would have cracked up. It would have been really, really horrible. I think it's very sad that we are still asking kids to be pink or blue, to be feminine or masculine. And I think there's very little room where is the room for the little boy to run around in a fairy dress and have a wand and wear a crown and look beautiful? And where's the room for these boys to be incredibly effeminate? I think that hasn't yet happened. And I think people are quick to see that there's a problem with somebody looking like that.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea that we should medicalize that child and give them hormones so that they look like more like a conventional girl, to me is quite regressive, because it will impair their ability to have children in the future, and it will impair their sexual functioning in the future, and it will lead to an awful lot of medical complications, because these drugs are really, really powerful. So to medicalize the child is a step further. It's almost like the hysteria around smashing the window when the kid was actually asleep and was okay. Why can't we live in a world where the kid runs around? Why medicalize, if you follow me? I just don't understand why we need to medicalize these identities. And I would like if a society widened the bandwidth of what it is to be a boy, a girl, a man, a woman, rather than insisted on people literally change the shape of their bodies so that we can say that's a nice conforming girl and that's a nice conforming boy, because that seems to be the big push. And so that frightens me.
With the podcast, then, do you have people coming on telling their experiences?
Yeah, so we've got everybody coming on. The first couple of episodes, we talked about the theories. There's different theories about why somebody might have a feeling of distress within them, that they feel like, as you said something earlier, that was kind of interesting, the feelings of being a girl.
Mm-hmm.
And we would penetrate that. We would say, well, what does that, you don't know what the feelings of being a girl is. I don't know what the feelings of being a girl is. Who am I to say that's a girlish feeling and that's a boyish feeling? That's society construct. Do you know what I mean? And so you might think you have the feelings of being a girl, and I could say, how do you know?
Yeah.
Maybe they're just feelings. Do you know what I mean? Maybe they're just feelings. It gets very interesting. So we talk about the theories behind it in the first few episodes, and then we interview different people. We interview a boy who was very effeminate, a gay man who was very effeminate as a child, for the third episode, which was quite interesting because it just showed just how effeminate he was. He was so effeminate. And then he grew up to be a gay man. Now, about 70 to 80% of children who are non-conforming do grow up to be gay or lesbian or bisexual. Now, why is that? That's a very interesting. Why are they effeminate? Why are gay men effeminate? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's in itself interesting. And also, if you start giving sexually development blocking drugs to a child, puberty blockers, if you block that child's puberty between 10 and 20, are you blocking the development of a gay man or a lesbian woman?
Yeah.
And if you block their sexual development, how will they ever know that they were a gay man? Because you blocked the sexual awakening. So that can feel a very authoritarian and intrusive thing to do to a child. Then we have had on a few trans people who talk about their experiences and why they, Book Angel is a very well-known trans man, and Debbie Haitlin is a very well-known trans woman. And we have them on to discuss how they transitioned, how it was for them. And then we have some detransitioners on. These are people who medically transitioned and then they reversed the process and decided to revert back. Then we have a lot of psychologists who work in the field for 30, 40 years, and the kind of conclusions they've come to, because it's really changed in the last 40 years. So probably my favorite episode is with Stephen Levine, and he's 80, and he's been working in gender since the 1970s. And it's a phenomenal interview of a man who's really, really, really got a deep understanding of gender. And so we're really immersed in this world at this stage.
Isn't it funny though, like when I was writing this episode and I obviously want to talk about gender and what you talk about in the podcast, and I immediately started to think about how do I phrase things. Isn't that funny? Like, and you mentioned about feeling like a little girl, and it's absolutely correct. Like, and it's because well, I guess I haven't brought this up before. I haven't talked about this before. I haven't had someone on who kind of works in that field, and it got me worried. It's happened a couple of times before with different things, but it's like, how do I phrase that without upsetting people? My immediate thought is to kind of, right, I hope I don't set up or like upset people of a
Yeah.
certain community.
And you're right to think like that because
Yeah,
you will.
yeah, fair enough.
And because when you start exploring this entire kind of phenomenon that's happened, you'll realize that it has grown in conjunction with the rise of identity politics, with the rise of social justice, and with the rise of an idea of you can't say that. And you and I'd imagine, I don't know what age you are, but I certainly grew up in a world where there was no such thing as a silly question. And you were allowed to ask a question in good faith because that's how you acquired knowledge. And the kind of the perfect storm of social justice and identity politics, along with internet, has created this kind of extraordinary world where actually there's an awful lot of things you're not allowed to say,
Yeah.
and there's an awful lot of things that are forbidden, and you will get a huge amount of pushback and a huge amount of vitriol for phrasing something wrong, even if you meant it in the nicest, even if the depths of your heart was opened up and explored and there wasn't a bad cell in there in the question. The fact that you phrased it wrong is enough in this kind of political heightened atmosphere that we're in. And I think it's very important that we push back against that, because it's not good for mental health.
Yeah.
For somebody to be able to think properly, they need to be able to speak. And for me to think my thoughts, the only way I can make sense of what I think about something is by talking about it extensively. That's why I'm a therapist. That's how I come to kind of a good understanding of something. If I can't ask questions, if I can't use certain words, then my thought is being shut down. And that is really frightening to me, because we were going to come to much more slogan kind of territory where there's no thinking and it's slogans. And that is not a good place for mental health. We need to have a freedom to be able to speak as we wish.
Yeah.
So that we can. Now, I'm not saying that if somebody says something disrespectful, if somebody says something really hateful, they should be taken up on it. But that's how society works. Up until recently, we were taken up on it. We were told you shouldn't say that because of it, but now you get slammed. And so what happened is, and George Orwell called it in the 1940s, he said self-censorship is the biggest threat. And all these years later, it's self-censorship that's creating the problem. It's not that people don't have thoughts, it's that people are afraid to speak their thoughts. And people are arguing that you can't say it. And they will argue very strenuously, no, Stella, you're wrong, you can't say it. And I'm like, if we keep on going like that, we're going to get sicker and sicker and sicker mentally.
Absolutely. I know you have a new book coming out soon. What's the title and what's it about?
It's called What Your Teen is Trying to Tell You.
Okay.
And it's about teenagers. They are my favorite group to work with. I'm very fond of them. And because I was a mad teenager myself. And the idea is, I suppose, so often when I work with teenagers, I know that their behavior, there's a great phrase, all behavior is communication. They're communicating something with their behavior and their eye rolling and their strops. And what the book is trying to do is show what this communication, they might be doing this, but they might be meaning that. And it's trying to kind of show how a teenager communicates, what's behind the communication. Because often it's fear, it's sadness, it's disappointment, it's anger. And what you might be reading is the cover story and missing the lonely place behind that.
It sounds like another must read from Stella O'Malley. Stella, I always ask this question too, because again, I'm interested in people in general, but what do you like to do in your spare time?
I like music. I like playing the whistle and playing the banjo and singing. I don't do it enough. I've been working a huge amount in the last few years, and I've really let music go. And I went to a session there on Friday, and I thought, geez, I've got to get back into this. Yeah. I'll be picking up the banjo, I'd say, a lot more in the next while. That's probably my favorite thing to do. Oh, another thing I love to do, you won't be surprised at, is I love meeting people for lunch and talking. I'm a big talker.
Which is great, though. I mean, that's what we need, and I don't know if we're kind of losing that a little bit as well. Like, it's the idea. Maybe we if we try to list the things that helped the pandemic made us kind of look at that we weren't doing enough is maybe meeting people.
Yeah, yeah. I really realized during the pandemic, I go to Dublin, I need to meet mates once in a
Mm.
while. And I kind of, life becomes very work, work, work if I don't. And that was a real learning for me that I actually need it. I didn't realize it was such a need for me.
And the other thing, like your work, if you are, in the office or on Zoom or whatever you do, but also you're obviously writing a lot as well. So it's a lot of, particularly with writing, it's a lonely
Yeah.
vocation. So that kind of need to get out there and meet people. And I guess like with, if you are going to sessions, and I don't know if you play in sessions, do
Do a
you
little bit, but I
perform?
haven't in years. I used to a lot, but
Well, maybe
get
that's the
back
next,
to it.
maybe
Yeah.
that's for 2023,
Or 2024. I'll be
Or try, maybe you can bring it.
honest.
Yeah, well, you've got the new book as well coming soon. So that's going to be a little bit of the rounds and the promotional stuff as well.
Yeah, I'm not gonna beat myself up in it, but I do like it, so I'm gonna get back into it. Yeah.
So, where can people find you?
Oh, I'm easily found. StellaMalley.com. You'll find me easily enough. I'm on loads of social media, and I'm on TikTok these
Oh,
days.
are you on TikTok? Eh?
Yeah, Stella Valley Psych, or psychotherapist maybe. And I'm on Twitter and stuff like that. I'm easily found if you Google me. Very
Yeah,
easy.
because your website is very well put together and so easy to kind of look around and stuff. Because obviously, you had to do a little bit of research,
Oh, very good.
as you can imagine. So it was very easy. But Stella, you've been an absolutely wonderful guest and very informative. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I enjoyed that.
Thanks. If you don't mind, Stella, with this tradition, I'll just finish this out. I'll take a quick photo and then we'll go on our ways. All right.
Cool.
Thank you very much. I also need to thank John because he does the tech stuff that I cannot do. Stella mentioned about her being bad at tech. Yeah, well, I'm right up there with you, Stella. I also want to thank, as usual, my mum, my dad, my granddad, Jern Calvin for the music and the logo. Subscribe to us on YouTube if you would. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And then the usual podcast places: Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google Podcasts, all those ones. Thanks everyone for watching or listening, whatever you did. And once again, Stella, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Everyone else, see you next week. Take care. Bye.